this is a very favorite. In the old days, the ladies, at least wherever I went and visited women in all parts of Italy working, when I would ask them for notes or designs, they had nothing written down. And what they would do is they would do little swatches. So this is a little swatch. And the woman who gave me this years ago, she was already 90, and this was her grandmother's piece. And she said, and this is just out, a little suburb outside of Florence, and she said it was a beautiful spring day, and her grandmother had walked all the way into town, into the center of Florence. And the beautiful cathedral there, which is the main church, is called Santa Maria dei Fiori, St. Mary of the Flowers, because it was built in a field of flowers hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And she was so inspired when she came home, she decided not to put her little figure, you know, with the geometric design, but she would do hers in a beautiful church setting. And then people always ask me how big it is. So there's the little stork scissors, and you can see how small it is. And the other question I bring people, they always say, well, could they demonstrate for us or show us the pattern? And they have no pattern. They've been doing similar things since they were 3 or 4 years old. They started very early. And like they said, well, we have to start with the feet, otherwise how can it stand? And so they just start stitching with the feet and do anything they want. And so this is her grandmother's sample. Again, very rare. Next. Well, of course, and here it is, the traditional white on white. And notice the buttonhole flowers on the side, the beautiful raised cording, and then the figure is all needle lace. Next. Well, of course, this would be wonderful to do for a wedding sheet, right, for your trousseau. So you have to have a man and a woman. And I found all these years, over 30 years, of taking Americans and Canadians to Italy to see all the needlework. We always want names of things, and how long does it take? Well, so of course they asked me for the name of this, and I didn't know, so I asked the ladies, and they looked at me horrified, and they said, well, of course, it's Giovanna and Giovanni. It's Joan and John, because the patron saint of Florence is Saint John. So of course, any figure would be John, and then the female version would be John. So this is, the name of this design is Joan and John, and linked together forever, forever. But again, look at how lovely. So they didn't have anything charted. They didn't have anything drawn out. They just have boxes and boxes of swatches. And that's what they would look. And then I used to sit with them for hours, and people would come in, and they still do today, not everybody, but many who can afford it, to order their trousseau. And again, they wouldn't just say, I want this, and they say, no, I want this, but I want this flower here. So they make up a new design using those components. Next. So this is all part of the antique stitch. Next. Then we go just outside of Florence, about an hour in the car, out to the countryside, and we have Guidi embroidery. And a few of us just took a class with the ladies in Florence, and our hardest problem was, as we're getting older, none of us could see the threads to pull the threads. So even with our magnifiers and our stitches, so thank God our two teachers were very kind and pulled all the threads for us so that we could do the work. But I teach a Guidi, but I do it in American style. I always tell the traditional way, but I've adapted it. But this is an old piece, a tablecloth over 100 years old. Next. And close up, you can see the raised and padded work, the raised stem stitch here, the cording, the buttonhole flower, and to give it a lacy background, doing the square stitch behind it. Next. A very old bag, over 100 years old. And I used to have a beautiful ribbon through it, and you can see a lovely vase of flowers, all in the Guidi work. Next. And they have a wonderful group going. Another old bag. Next. And a close-up of it. Next. This instead was done by a young woman, and I bought this for my granddaughter's first Holy Communion about 5 years ago. And beautiful work, beautifully done. Notice her wonderful little tassels, because each region does them a little bit differently. And notice, again, and my students at home, because it takes long to finish, but they have finished their pillows like this. Notice how they've joined the front and the back. Look at the side, the beautiful bullion stitch. Beautiful finishing technique. Next. Well, these were pieces our teachers brought to us. 2 months ago when we were there, and notice they're getting very contemporary too. 50 years ago, it would have been unheard of to do a Christmas decoration in the technique. And you can see that the traditional designs, they're out where the olive groves are and the vineyards are, and the wheat. So these are all the motifs they use in their designs. So these are recent pieces. Again, they are publishing many wonderful books too. Next. And here were more samples. And this, they made me a little sachet or pincushion, and you can see it. And they were doing these with everybody's initial. And very nice. And again, I love the raised work. They've done the raised stem, the Casalguidi band, and then beautiful bullions or cording on top, giving it a wonderful raised technique. Casalguidi embroidery. Next. Well, we already saw this beautiful christening dress. I can't talk about Italian needlework and not mention the beautiful smocking they do on children's clothing, even on little boys' clothing. And still to this day, because for them, and I saw this the first day I went to Italy, and I still see it today, even though things are changing, that when you're at a family dinner on Sunday, the first ones served are the grandparents, and then the children, and then the hardworking parents in the middle. But there's great respect still for the elderly, and then great respect for the future. So little children are really the prince or princess of the family, and they will, no matter what their socioeconomic level, will dress them very elegantly for special occasions. And the stores are beautiful. Filled with beautiful things. Thank God mine were little when the dollar was good and I could still afford these things. Now they're very expensive, but beautifully done and always hand done. Next. One of my favorite stitches I used forever before I ever went to Italy, the Palestrina stitch. Palestrina is a town that's older than Rome. It's the first thing they like to tell you. They're older than Rome, and it's just outside of Rome by a half hour. And they do several stitches, but their most famous is the knotted stitch that you see going around. They also do a filling stitch, which I'll show you. This is a pillow, and it has the official label on the left and the measurements, and that it was from the shop in Palestrina. And this was probably 1915, this pillow. Okay, next. We'll show you a close-up. There you can see the knot, the Palestrina knot, and then they do a filling stitch that looks like a couching stitch. And at the bottom, notice this is a pillow, as I told you, how beautiful the buttons are. Their tassels, are they not just exquisite and a wonderful way to do buttons? Next. Many of their designs, they are famous. They have people go there because they have a famous Etruscan museum and beautiful pieces. And so many of their designs, like this border, is taken from the old Etruscan designs incised on the pots. And once again, I like to show you, this is the front, and look at the back side, how beautifully done. And they're using Pearl 5 thread. And they have several groups doing beautiful work. Next. This is the other work that they do. And it's very similar where they, like in Assisi work, they do the outline with the stem stitch, usually in a dark color. And then the background is very similar to a couching. However, I haven't mastered it well enough yet. They do it with a little twist that it really has a beautiful texture. So that's the other stitch they do in Palestrina. And they have two very active groups. Next. Here's a tablecloth they've done with that same background stitch. And beautiful picot edgings at the bottom. Next. This was a magnificent tablecloth that they did for Pani and Fili for the international traveling exhibit. Next. Next. Lovely design, an Etruscan design. Next. And here you can see the top, the front, and the back. Next. Orvieto lace. This is a lace done with a crochet hook, but I have to include it because it's so unusual. And it's only done in the town of Orvieto, which is an hour drive north from Rome. And it's a magnificent city, famous for its beautiful Duomo. Probably the facade is one of the most beautiful in all of Italy. And I used to watch the ladies doing it, and for a while it had died out. And now I know so many young women in Orvieto doing beautiful work, just like inoni, like their grandmothers used to do. And what they do is they crochet with a very fine hook all of these motifs and all those hexagons. And then they base stitch them onto heavy linen. And after all the motifs are base stitched, then they go around with the crochet hook directly on the cloth, and they crochet all of it together for this lacy background. And what were they trying to do? They were trying to duplicate the beautiful needlepoint laces of Venice. Everybody tried to copy those. They were the most precious, the most prestigious. Next. And then what blew my mind was, and it's hard to see, but you can see them. You'll see like little bumps, raised areas. Are you able? Okay. And I thought, I asked the ladies, how can you achieve that? What are you doing to get that? And I couldn't believe it. I had them repeat it to me several times to make sure I understood them. They would take all the old iron keys, like that one right there, put it on the hot fire, and get it really hot. And then from the back, massage it where they wanted the raised area. Can you imagine doing that and not burning your needlework? So that's how they do those raised areas. And this work is found only in Orvieto, no place else. Next. Macrame. Macrame, and there's still a school and museum up near in the Genoa area because that was a very important shipping port. It still is today. And the sailors learned macrame from the Arab world, and they used to do it the long hours on their journey. And so this was a beautiful old piece which my friend had made into a silver necklace. Next, we have a close-up, yeah. And there again, they're trying to copy the figures done in the needlepoint lace, but here they're done with the half hitch. So this, you know, when I think about macrame, I think about the 70s, and I think about all the plant hangers, right? Well, this is macrame. It was another form of lace making. Next. This is a beautiful, which I'm thrilled to have this because I took this slide probably 50 years ago because today the quilt, the original one, is away in storage. This is a beautiful trapunto, which is Italian quilting. And this is the original quilt. Half of it is in the Palazzo Davanzati, where I'm going to be leaving my antique pieces and books to the city of Florence, and the other half is in the Victoria and Albert Museum. The one in Florence, an embroiderer there did a duplicate of it, which is on display, but the original now you have to see, you can only see by appointment. And it tells the story of Tristan and Isolde. It was actually made down in Sicily. And it's just beautiful. Again, I love the white on white. I love the fact that it's so dimensional. So this is Italian quilting called trapunto. Next. This is a more contemporary piece done by an American artist who has lived in Florence now 40 years. And she and her husband run a textile and jewelry making studio very successfully all of these years. However, they had a hard time beginning 40 years ago, as you can imagine. And my friend who's in the textile business helped them along. And so in gratitude, she did this beautiful, this is a Roman relief that's in the museum of two men in the fabric business selling cloth. And she did this in trapunto. It's probably as large as the screen. Next. And then a friend of mine, when I was talking about this in Italy, said, oh, I many years ago did a bed jacket with trapunto. More contemporary. Next. This is, again, we see the word ars, art of Byzantine art. And I'm going here next spring. This is from the city of Ravenna. And they do what they call ars byzantina. And what's wonderful about their work, it has the same idea. They're filling in the negative space. The outline of the design is done in the stem stitch, and then the background is filled in with 2-ply of either silk or a floss, a couching stitch. But what's wonderful, every piece they do is documented from what church from the 5th century it's taken. Next, and you'll see that here. So this is from the 5th century, a marble screen in the church in Ravenna. Next. And here you can see the design. Next. And you can see this, I was there when they were working for the piece for me for the exhibit. Next. And once again, you can see how neat the back is on it. Next. Well, a beautiful piece done by a wonderful woman called Elizabeth Holzer. And Janine just finished translating a book that she did in English. And I met her many years ago, probably 10 years ago, when she first showed her work at Italia in Vita. And I was so impressed. And she comes from the city. She wasn't born, but I think all of her married life has been spent in the city of Ferrara. And she loves to stitch, and she realized they have a beautiful tradition of ceramics, but nothing in particular for needlework. So what she did is she was inspired by all the designs from the ceramics and the beautiful colors. And then she took most of the stitches that we all know and used them in a new way. So her work just gets more and more beautiful. So this is typical of her design, and she calls it Punto Estense, okay, from that area. Next. So this is from Ferrara. But again, stitches that we all know, it's the way that she's used them. Next. And up north in the Piemonte region near France, we have the stitch called bandera from the material it was done on. And it's very much a painting stitch. Next. And they do all these lovely designs like this. And it goes back a very old tradition. I have an old piece done in silk. Next. This is a very old piece in the museum. It was dark. But you can see a painting stitch. Okay, dipinto ago. But they call it Punto Bandera, and it comes from Torino and Piemonte, that area up north. Next. Now, we're back in Umbria again, and near the town of Assisi is a wonderful hilltop town called Deruta, famous for its ceramics from the 12th century. And so again, the embroiderers there looked at and were inspired by the beautiful designs of the ceramics. And once again, the stitch, so they've used the designs from the ceramics and the colors, and using a couching type of stitch have done lovely stitches. So this is one type of Punto Deruta. Next. This is a tablecloth, and I think I have a close-up to show you. Or this one here is a tablecloth. Next, yeah. So this is typical of their work. But then they also have another kind. Next. They have this type of Punto Deruta, and I'm sure the ladies have examples of this. And here, this looks almost like a square stitch, but it isn't. It's done in 2 different steps, and it gets a very sheer, lacy look. Next, you'll see it hanging from the window. Since it's in the region of Perugia where this is done, the symbol of the region is the mythical lion there, the griffin. And again, they have not the tree of life, but the fountain of life, because Perugia is the most famous medieval fountain is in Perugia, and the birds drinking from it. So this is also Punto Deruta. Next. Next. And then, of course, Assisi work. And we have the master herself here, and these are pieces that Tiziana has shared with us. And this tablecloth she brought today, not only is her mother's here stitching and demonstrating, but this was a tablecloth done by her grandmother. Magnificent work. Next. And just look at the borders. And good thing I don't ever say anything publicly until I've checked it out, but I thought those beautiful borders were to make it look lacy. And when I asked the ladies one day, and they said, no, that's to pay homage. The other great art besides Assisi work in the town of Assisi is their beautiful wrought iron work. They have beautiful wrought iron, the most beautiful lights to hold like candles on the buildings, and flower pots. So that's in honor of the ferro battuto, the beautiful wrought iron work. And also, everybody wants a statue of St. Clair doing embroidery. And when I ask in the shops there, they go, no, she's not. The English have made her the patron of embroidery. And they told me recently she was made the patron of TV. Okay, so not embroidery in Italy. That's in England. Next. So contemporary piece. Next. And this, I don't need to buy another piece, but I bought this 4 or 5 years ago. I couldn't resist because I love asymmetrical things, and I don't very often find one, so I had to break down and buy this one too. Next. Next. These are from Tiziana's grandmother. And I'm sure she's a woman who didn't go beyond the 6th grade, probably never left her town of Assisi, and had the technique, but look at the beautiful designs she developed. Greatly inspired by, again, the church and all the beautiful designs in the church. Next. Beautiful. So this is Tiziana's grandmother, these pieces. Next. Look at that magnificent border on that, the seahorses. This is the most popular color used too, and then the blue. Next. This is an old piece, very old, and it's using the long arm cross stitch. Next. And this one too. Next. And tassels. I have to say a little bit about tassels. Of course, these are the ones we are most familiar with, ones made of beautiful silk or rayon, and there are wonderful tassel shops all over Italy. Next. But my favorite are the ones done on the pieces done out in the countryside where they didn't waste a thread, and they knotted them to give them these wonderful textures. Next. And here you can see, this one we just learned from the Calzoguidi ladies on the left, and the one in the center is from Umbria, and the one on the right is from the antique Tuscan, and the beautiful beads from Deruta. Next. Bargello. I can't talk about Italian needlework and not mention Bargello, and I hope you all know by now that the Bargello is the National Museum of Sculpture in Florence. In the Renaissance days, it was a prison, and if you like fairy tales or folk tales, I guess you could believe that as the prisoners were awaiting their death at the chopping block, they would do the Bargello. And called the flame stitch and all that. And I agree with many years ago with Elsa Williams, and she went to Florence and researched, and like she said to me, it should be called not the Bargello or the flame stitch, because there are many patterns. It should be called the Florentine upright stitch. Then my friend Clara, who's downstairs too, and her family is, has one of the most important hand weaving studios in Perugia. And her daughter restored a loom that the last nun back in the 40s used to do the flame stitch. And I was just reading an old book that was very popular by Shirley Lance on patterns for needlepoint canvas. And she has a little chapter on Bargello, and she says the same thing, and I'm beginning to think more and more that I research. Bargello came from a weaving. The weavers did it first. And that's what my weavers, hand weavers in Florence say. It started, and Claudia's daughter restored the loom and actually wove it in the old flame stitch, because the nun died and left, again, nothing written. God forbid they should be that organized and write something, right? And she developed it. And reading some of these old books, I'm beginning to feel. So it was started by the weavers did this, and then it went copied by the stitchers. So the Bargello. Okay, next.